Hi, I'm Frank, and I'm a 12th grader currently based in Andover, Massachusetts. My first thoughtful exposure to the Holocaust was in my first philosophy and religious studies classroom, a space not more than a stone's throw away from the pine grove that framed the basement of our chapel. It was there that I encountered the most sure-handed of academic guardians, a figurative tree on which I lean for guidance and rely for intellectual nourishment. My instructor in an age-old elective on the Holocaust, Dr. Legaspi. Like the best of teachers, Dr. Legaspi excels at humanizing the stories that Anne Frank told so movingly. His meditations offered us the surest of intellectual roots, his questions coaxing us ever deftly to branch out. It was here, framed by that pine grove, that I set forth into the history that Anne Frank lived, the stories both upended and all the more in bloom. When I told Dr. Legaspi of this occasion last Friday night, he called on me to honor her legacy as she would. To, quote, hold on to hope while understanding the fragility of goodness, end quote. It's my fantasy that you find in this piece a shadow of the hope that animated her being, perhaps a ditty to the fragility of goodness. Here goes. Bloodsongs. When my grandfather cooks, he can touch the hot pan without flinching. At 6, I used to stare into the kitchen to wince every time his flesh neared flame. Against a backdrop of steam and seasoning, I watched him plate heaping servings of tomato squash stew, spicy tofu, lotus roots bought fresh from the market that afternoon. Each night, when he finally drew a wet washcloth across his forehead with a smile and sigh, I'd take a long look at his hands as he scooped me into his arms. I expected something beyond human. Instead, I saw palms knotted thick with calluses, fingernails cracked with grit and grime. Only later did I notice that the other grandmas and grandpas in the neighborhood had the same nails and palms. Each one of them also returned each evening after hours haggling in the market over woks and watercress to the same honeycomb of AC units, winding stairwells, and the mold-infested walls that was our community. They made up for the lack of real estate with an abundance of conversation. After dinner every evening, I stayed within earshot of my grandpa through his evening cigarette and banter with the tenants across the street. Between smoke rings and belly laughs, the adults retold stories from the milkman, the daily paper, the wet market, their voices pulsing across the squat balconies as I watched our washing lines rock in the breeze. During these conversations, Grandpa never addressed me directly, so I turned with the start one evening when he pressed a paddle into my palm. He continued to bemoan the local butcher's fifth-field fiancé as he curled my fingers around the lacquered wood, his calluses sandpapering shallow white scratches on my knuckles and wrists. I felt the paddle sink in my hand, limp and foreign, as gossip zipped between the balconies like hummingbirds. Only when he ground his cigarette butt into the floor with the heel of his slipper and retreated indoors, when our balcony door cut off the crooning conversation, did I return the paddle to his outstretched hand. 2 months later, I was trotting alongside Grandpa through Hangzhou's lingering September heat. We passed stretches of street paved by peeled, cracked cement tiles, kids still in school uniform eating local snacks and gambling along the sidewalk, a shop-lined street vaguely resembling a once prosperous outlet. When we reached the ring of shops that lined the local park, we made a beeline for the derelict, beat-up office unit sandwiched between the dry cleaner and daycare. On better days, the afternoon sun shed just enough light to illuminate the ping-pong table within. Inside, the walls were peeling. The place smelled of mildew and lingering hints of cigarette smoke. I would throw my school bag in a corner, unclip my school tie. We'd set down our paddles on the dusty table and scavenge for the cobweb-ridden ping pong balls stashed in the shadows. Next thing we knew, the place would fill with a familiar pop of bouncing balls. Serve, parry, slice, drive, smash. I stood at 4 feet, barely enough to see over the net, facing Grandpa, over a foot taller and 10 times in age. No matter, we'd spend every afternoon there, breathing in the mildew and smoke, our laughter echoing off the high ceiling and peeling walls as we played. Serve, parry, slice, drive, smash. Serve, parry, slice, drive, smash. 2 autumns later, our cohort of 2 grew to 24. Retirees ventured from across town with cigarettes and 2-legged stools to line the office unit with makeshift bleachers and raucous commentary. Lines of children grew long out the door, knobbly limbs jostling for a rotation at the paddle and table. Grandpa's paddle handle blackened from passing hundreds of hours and scores of hands. Our laughter swelled into a chorus that rang through the shops and sang through the community. I came to know my grandpa's town in the outskirts of Hangzhou through rhythm and routine. Afternoons listening to adults' tableside conversations and the lulling pop of plastic balls, evenings playing gomoku with neighbors on Grandpa's bamboo-sheeted bed, the game board tinged with the bittersweet aroma of tea flasks and incense, mornings putting out the laundry with Grandma, using a hooked bamboo stick to reach the washing lines high above, a life not rich in material, but rich in experience. When I arrived in the United States at 10, I longed to see a hollow ball dancing between the 2 wooden paddles once more. In my mind's eye, I watched every smoke and mildew afternoon like a grainy film on repeat. Relived the adults' booming laughter, the delight of finding an undented ball at the foot of the wall. At school, daily offenses melted into a mosaic of misunderstandings. American classmates pinched their eyes into slits and declared themselves Chinese. I bottled up their jeers of Ching Chong into vats of silent tears. American classmates asked if I ate dogs. I laughed and returned to my cafeteria curly fries. Each night, I poked on my rice bowl without a single word. At home each afternoon, as I watched the chorus of conversation sing across the balconies of my imagination, I could rattle off who had gained weight in the latest bok choy discount, but I couldn't answer who you are or where do you belong. At 13, I found an answer on a flight to China as an unaccompanied minor. For the first time in 12 months, I'd be able to hug Grandpa. The man in 26F was a grandpa too. In English, his name translated to Grand Blossom. The flight was his trip home to family street food outings and bedtime stories. When he spoke, his words gave life to the simplest of things, even sugar popsicles or the hum of the metro. As he described his hometown, Laojia, the cramped cabin became our own little oasis of storytelling. When wheels hit runway, we wrapped up our conversation in slips of United Airlines napkins, scribbled with our phone numbers and nicknames. Grand Blossom had also had cracked nails and calloused palms. In the States, he would turn to see so many stretch their eyes into slits, but learned in time to steady his mind and gaze. He told me that I felt alien in America not because of the nation that I was in, but because of the upbringing that was stripped away. I found America to be quiet because it lacked the only sounds I knew. Balls bouncing off paddles, laughter bouncing off balconies. But he also reminded me that America is loud in a different way. a loudness apparent in the spirited primaries we saw on TV, in the elated shrieks of our neighbors as we played tag, scrambling through sprinklers and over each other's lawns, in the NPR programs we listened to every evening, the cheers over dominoes while watching Sunday football. He reminded me that every laugh, tear, and scream sings an equal allegiance to two countries, that every serve, parry, slice, drive, smash sends us ricocheting across communities, that our blood runs at the confluence of two streams. Our beauty lies in not either or, but everything in between. One evening every summer, over spicy tofu and fresh lotus roots, I unfurl that United Airlines napkin and punch in Grand Blossom's number. When he fills the phone with the same spark and spirit he first offered under the airplane reading light, his voice is a rhythm as familiar as wooden paddles parrying hollow balls. Long after the receiver goes silent, I imagine his voice pulsing between the balconies, catching the laughter in stride. I imagine his voice, the voice of millions of Chinese cosmopolitans, and every chant of liberty and every click of a Gamoku piece. For ours is a community without borders, a community whose song my heart forever sings.